I'm Davy. I'm awesome. Welcome to Davy's Awesome Wrestling, where I review wrestling-related things, all from the perspective of a fan, not an insider. This week, I'm reviewing a documentary that is currently available on Tubi, a documentary that came out in 2021 about the life of Brodie Lee, 1 year after his passing. The documentary, This Is Brodie Lee. Let's get into it. Well, it starts with his being a backyard wrestler in Syracuse, New York, for a little backyard wrestling promotion, Appalachian Pro Wrestling or something like that. I don't remember the name. What I do remember was funny, though, was watching this documentary. As a little side note, I remember years and years ago when I was into backyard wrestling, looking up some other websites and finding this very one, because I remember some of the names. I remember Huber 1 and Huber 2. Turned out he was one of those, John Huber. And I even remembered Sweet Lou. I was like, wait a minute, is that backyard league I looked up 20, 30 years ago? Holy crap! Turns out that little backyard wrestling actually produced a couple of wrestlers. And one of them, probably the most famous one, being Brodie Lee. It goes into the backyard wrestling days. How was, of course, like most of us who did backyard wrestling, it was just for fun. And usually very silly. Apparently he had a very silly sense of humor, and it was always showing in his backyard wrestling, which I can relate to, because backyard wrestling, yes, a lot of us didn't take it seriously. It was not meant to be serious, it was fun. This leading up to, though, eventually a few of them deciding, let's go pro, let's get into the indies. So they did, they got trained, they went to the indies for their own little league, RPW, where for a time he was still going by Huber, but then eventually decided he needed to go with a better name. And he came up with the name Brodie Lee, which a lot of people thought had to do with Bruiser Brody, because he resembled him somewhat. But it turned out that was not the inspiration behind Brodie Lee. The name Brodie Lee apparently came from one of my favorite movies, Mallrats. His favorite character being Brody, played by Jason Lee. He decided to combine the two to be Brodie Lee. That's just so awesome for somebody like me to know. And originally going with his humor, being the biggest guy among that little group of backyard wrestlers, getting into indie promotion, the most intimidating guy, he starts out calling himself The Right Stuff Brodie Lee, coming out to The Right Stuff by the New Kids on the Block. I'm sad I never got to see him come out to that. Like I mentioned, though, it mentioned his actual real-life brother, Sweet Lou, who was an indie wrestler for a while. It also mentioned his close friends that he grew up backyard wrestling with, like Colin Delaney and Jimmy Olsen. Colin Delaney, who most of us remember as the guy who was getting the crap beat out of him under the mentorship of Tommy Dreamer in the WWE ECW days, which may not be like the biggest thing to ever be done in wrestling, but he made it to WWE, did something that some of us remember. And then, of course, Jimmy Olsen, somebody we all know from the indies. Went into his brother Sweet Lou and how he kind of just transitioned out of it. He wrestled for a while, even had a big feud with Brodie Lee as some kind of a golfer caddy gimmick, and then eventually became his manager, but it clearly wasn't for him. It also went a little bit into him and how he met his wife on the indies, who was a ring valet known as Cindy Sin, the real-life Amanda Buckland, who later became Amanda Huber. But this is one of the areas where I kind of feel like the documentary kind of missed something. It's usually heartwarming to hear those kinds of stories, and it kind of just went past. It was like, yeah, by the way, this is where he met her. Went into how what really kind of made him bigger into the indies was matches with Abyss, particularly a cage match, who, at the time Abyss was known, he was in TNA, and he was an indie icon already. But then from there, they're both in RPW, they're kind of doing their local things only, but a few of them, Colin Delaney, Jimmy Olsen, and Brodie Lee, really wanted to branch out. Wanted to be the guys that were not just local little indie guys, but rather going all over the country. And it was upon this that an indie wrestler, Mitch Ryder, suggested him that with his look and having a name like Brodie Lee, instead of being The Right Stuff Brodie Lee, he should do the whole trucker looking gimmick. And it went into the stages of his trucker gimmick, coming out and wrestling in jeans, which according to Colin Delaney was funny because until then he'd never even seen the guy wear jeans just cuz. Getting the trucker hats, eventually getting the idea of wearing the dirty looking shirt, which they did emphasize was not actually dirty, just looked dirty. But this worked, it caught on, and it led to him basically working for all the big indies at the time. Ring of Honor, Chikara, CZW, so on and so forth. But then how, probably one of the worst weeks of his life, he hurts his leg working in Dragon Gate USA, looks like he's not going to get anywhere. He gets a phone call from John Laurinaitis, who at the time was the Vice President of Talent Relations, saying that they wanted him in WWE. So his leg heals, he goes to NXT, where he becomes Luke Harper, which is what most fans would remember him as, because, you know, WWE's not big on letting people keep their indie names. And very quickly into that, he gets paired up with Bray Wyatt and Eric Rowan, part of the Wyatt family, which is, again, where most of us would remember him from. And from there was success in WWE. Of all of the guys that he came up with, he's definitely the most successful. The Wyatt family became very big, so much to the point that when they split up and went their separate ways, Luke Harper goes on to become the Intercontinental Champion. Something no one can ever take away from him. He's in the history books forever. But after that, WWE really not having any idea what to do with him. At one point they tried to repackage him with Eric Rowan as the Bludgeon Brothers. And even though they were tag team champions at one point, I don't think anybody expected that was ever going to work. So because of that and the fact that he can't get where he wants to get creatively, he does what is pretty ballsy and asks for his release. So from there, he leaves, goes back to the Indies for a minute, and very soon after gets called back up to wrestling through AEW, where he got to come back as the Exalted One, Brodie Lee, the secret leader of the Dark Order. It was awesome. And it was so good that AEW very quickly was pushing him the way he should have been pushed. He was in the main event challenging for the AEW Championship. He eventually was the second ever TNT champion. Then unfortunately he passed away. They went into the details about that. His lung disease that he got, how it took him out. He was in the hospital. They were all hearing about it, hoping that he would recover. And sadly, he never did. Something they did not mention in this that I kind of think is a nice note was the TNT Championship that he won. That design was retired after his death. This is where, though, I will say, again, it's not really a criticism, just a note. Compared to most wrestling documentaries, it lags on here. Because they get to his death, and then it goes on for about 30 more minutes of them just talking about him. And this is already a very long documentary. Most documentaries are about an hour, hour and a half maybe. This is a 2.5+ hour documentary. A lot of it lags. As a wrestling fan to another wrestling fan, just warning people, it does lag. They talk so much about his beginning days and indie career that it gets to a point if you're like, okay, I got it. Can we move on? Skips over certain things that I kind of wish they would have gotten a little bit more into. Like, I wish they would have gotten a little bit more into how he met his wife. I wish they would have gotten a little bit more into his children. They did mention the children, and they mentioned how it's sad that their father is gone and how that's their legacy, but there was also tons of stories around the time of his death of how, as important wrestling was, it was nothing to him compared to his family. But that seemed to kind of get brushed to the side. And then again, even after they get to the point of his death, it goes on for like another 30 minutes of them just talking about him. Not just talking about his death or anything, giving details, just talking about him. But again, that's not really a criticism, just more of an observation. More as a warning to those of you who haven't seen this and want to see it, there are going to be times that it's going to lag on. The reason I don't criticize it for that is because of what this documentary truly is. This documentary is a documentary made by his friends, which is the feeling you get watching this documentary. That this isn't like a typical documentary, a typical biography where somebody was hired to just go around and get stories and put them together and give you the whole story of him. No, this was his friends got together, shared stories of their friend that they miss very much, which makes it to where even though sometimes, yes, it feels like it's lagging a little bit, adds the heart that you need in that documentary. So that being said, a little warning for that kind of stuff, but ultimately it is a really heartfelt documentary. It is one that really tugs on the heartstrings as you listen to somebody who a lot of us loved in wrestling be regaled with stories by his friends and family, as his brother is a big part of this documentary. So on that note, if you have not seen This Is Brodie Lee, you can find it for free on Tubi or even the YouTubes. So I do suggest that you go and check out This Is Brodie Lee. So there you have it. That's my wrestling review this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications for when I post the videos. And leave a comment so I can respond to in my next comment corner. If you've seen This Is Brodie Lee, tell me what you thought about it. Love you guys.